They will tell you wealth is numbers, profits, or the ticking rise of a stock chart. They are wrong. Wealth is not money, it is control, memory, and legacy. It is the invisible force that bends others to your will long after you are gone. Machiavelli understood that money is a weapon sharper than any sword, but only when wielded with discipline and cruelty. Generational wealth is not luck, it is design. It is power engraved into bloodlines, and it begins with one throne. A man who seeks wealth for himself alone builds nothing but a house of sand. The true game is not gold for one lifetime, but gold that survives time itself. Machiavelli would whisper that fortune is fickle, but design is eternal. To establish generational wealth, one must think like a ruler, not a merchant. A ruler does not ask how much he can earn, but how much he can control, and how long his hand will remain upon the levers after his bones have turned to dust. The throne of wealth is not a pile of coins, but a foundation of power. The families who hold dynasties across centuries are those who transformed money into institutions, estates, and structures that carry their names forward. They did not chase trends. They did not gamble on the moment. They carved permanence into the world. The throne is built by mastering patience, for empires collapse when the hunger for immediate pleasure outweighs the discipline of long strategy. It is built by mastering vision, for one who cannot see beyond his own death has already lost his fortune to strangers. It is built by mastering bloodlines, for wealth scattered by quarrels and inheritances dies in silence. The throne of wealth demands coldness, because generosity without calculation is suicide, and indulgence without restraint is ruin. But once the throne is built, once the foundation is secure, every coin you touch multiplies its shadow. People bend to the one who can sustain wealth beyond death. That is the first law, and the first throne from which all others descend. Fortune does not fall into the lap of the passive. Those who wait for wealth to appear through luck, inheritance, or chance are no different than beggars at the palace gates. Machiavelli understood that gold does not drift toward the idle, it is taken by those with the will to seize it. The world will always disguise opportunity as risk, and only those ruthless enough to act when others tremble will claim its spoils. Generational wealth begins not with chance discovery, but with deliberate capture, for waiting is surrender, and hesitation is the currency of the weak. A man who seeks fortune without the courage to grasp it will watch others consume his possibilities and leave him with nothing but regret. To capture wealth, one must be willing to make enemies. For every act of acquisition, someone is displaced, someone is conquered, and someone is left behind. This is not cruelty, it is necessity, for wealth cannot be multiplied unless first it is taken. The early families who built dynasties did not stumble upon gold. They wrestled it from those too timid to fight for it. They bought land when blood stained the soil. They claimed trade routes while others feared war, and they pressed advantage while their rivals slept. Boldness, not luck, is the seed of dynasties. Yet boldness without calculation is folly. The prince who leaps without foresight dies the death of a fool, while the one who studies the board counts the weaknesses of his rivals, and then strikes, becomes master of fortune itself. The taking of wealth is always a matter of timing, and he who waits for certainty will always move too late. Consider that every fortune you admire began with a theft, whether of land, of opportunity, or of vision denied to others. The world is not a fair ledger where effort equals reward. It is a battlefield where the bold rewrite the balance. To capture gold is to understand that the first coin is always the hardest, for it demands a break with fear. But once the first is taken, it multiplies, and others follow, for money is drawn to movement, as wolves are drawn to blood. Those who hesitate are forgotten, but those who act carve dynasties into stone. To establish wealth that endures, one must shed the illusions of fairness and embrace the truth. Fortune favors not the good, not the patient, but the one who takes. The ruin of most men is not that they cannot earn, but that they cannot hold. Gold leaks through their fingers like water because appetite rules their mind more than vision does. Machiavelli would have seen this as the first true test of a ruler, to govern oneself before governing others. A prince who cannot command his own desires is unfit to command a state, and a man who cannot resist indulgence will never build a dynasty. Discipline is the fortress around wealth, and without it, no empire can endure. Consider that every act of spending is a declaration of weakness, for it is a signal that one lives for the present moment instead of the eternal design. Pleasure is the tool by which the powerful strip wealth from the masses, and restraint is the weapon by which dynasties rise. The families that endure are those who treat every coin not as a meal to be devoured, but as a soldier to be positioned. They do not ask, "What can I buy?" but "What can I fortify?" They understand that luxury is the surest path to ruin, for every unnecessary indulgence becomes an invitation to vulnerability. Empires throughout history collapsed not from external attack, but from the softening of their rulers, who built palaces of silk while their foundations rotted. The fortress of discipline is built stone by stone through habit. The man who learns to deny himself small pleasures becomes capable of guarding great treasures. He who is unmoved by envy cannot be manipulated by comparison, and he who takes pride in control will not be undone by temptation. Discipline is the invisible wall that shields fortune from erosion, and it must be maintained with the same vigilance as an army defending its borders. To spend with calculation is not poverty, it is power, for it signals mastery. The man who owns little yet controls much is feared, while the man who owns much yet controls nothing is pitied. Generational wealth requires this fortress, because inheritance without discipline is merely the distribution of ruin. Children who inherit fortune but not restraint will reduce empires to ashes within a generation, while children trained in discipline will multiply even modest legacies into dynasties. To build wealth that endures, one must first master the instinct to consume, for consumption is death disguised as joy. Restraint is not weakness but strength, for it demands constant battle against the self, and victory in that war ensures victory in all others. Wealth held without discipline is already lost, but wealth fortified by discipline is unassailable. The fortress stands, silent, unyielding, waiting for time to pass, while kingdoms rise and fall around it. A single coin locked away is nothing but a corpse, silent and useless, but a coin put to work becomes a seed that grows into forests of gold. Machiavelli would say that wealth which does not multiply is already dying, for power that stagnates decays in silence. The law of multiplication is the very heart of generational wealth, because no dynasty is built on hoarding alone. To hoard is to freeze power in time, but to multiply is to extend power across centuries. The wise ruler understands that every coin must be given a task, whether it is to breed through trade, to expand through land, or to reproduce through enterprises that yield without ceasing. Money left idle is prey, waiting to be consumed by inflation, envy, or theft. Money set in motion becomes a predator, hunting down opportunity and feeding itself with interest and returns. The families who rule across ages mastered this principle. They built systems where wealth worked long after they were gone, where estates, businesses, and trust generated income as naturally as rivers flow to the sea. Their strength lay not in their initial hoard, but in their ability to design engines of perpetual multiplication. The merchant who spends a lifetime chasing profits will die with a modest pile, but the prince who creates a system where wealth breeds itself leaves behind an empire. Multiplication requires vision, for not all soil grows the same harvest. To scatter seeds without judgment is to waste them, but to plant with strategy is to ensure abundance. The Machiavellian mind does not seek the safest ground, but the most fertile one, where risk and reward are balanced with calculation, and where one victory can fund 10 more. The law of multiplication also demands patience, for growth is rarely immediate. The impatient man digs up his seeds to see if they have sprouted and finds nothing but rot, while the disciplined man allows time to serve him. Compounding is the silent ally of those who endure, turning small beginnings into colossal legacies. Yet, one must remember that multiplication without protection invites ruin. A fortune that grows too visible attracts envy, parasites, and predators. The art lies in multiplying wealth in silence, allowing its strength to accumulate out of sight until it is too powerful to be challenged. To establish generational wealth, one must abandon the illusion that money alone is the goal. Money is only the soldier. Multiplication is the campaign. When every coin you possess is set to work, when every investment carries the possibility of breeding another, then you have escaped the trap of mortality. You have forged a treasury that breathes and grows, one that will whisper your name long after your voice is gone. The law of multiplication is not just about wealth, it is about immortality disguised as interest. Wealth that exists only in numbers is a phantom, capable of vanishing with a single war, a single law, or a single collapse of confidence. The true dynasties understood that power must be carved into permanence, bound to the earth itself. Land and stone do not flee when kings fall. They do not vanish when banks tremble. They endure as silent monuments to foresight. Machiavelli would counsel that a wise prince ties his fortune to what cannot be easily erased, for estates, properties, and foundations outlast both fortune's favour and the fickleness of markets. To own land is to own the ground upon which others must kneel. For every tenant, every farmer, every merchant who works upon it becomes a tributary to your legacy. Land cannot be replicated, and for that reason it has always been the bedrock of dynastic wealth. The family that controls the soil controls the harvest, and the family that controls the harvest controls the survival of all others. Stone, too, carries its own power. Castles, mansions, halls, and institutions are more than dwellings. They are symbols that whisper authority into the minds of all who see them. A palace may crumble over centuries, but its very ruins proclaim the name of the family that once commanded it. Generational wealth is not only about accumulation but about memory, and land and stone are the most faithful scribes of memory. They tell the world who once reigned, who still reigns, and who shall continue to reign. Even the humblest beginnings, once rooted in land, can grow into sprawling dynasties. Consider how the first purchase of soil becomes the anchor for every future expansion. How a single estate can swell into a network of farms, towns, and cities bound to one bloodline. Unlike fleeting coins or vanishing trades, These endure generation after generation because they are not dependent on shifting tides, but on the eternal rhythm of human need. People will always require ground to stand on, walls to shelter them, and halls to gather in. To possess them is to possess necessity itself. Yet, with this permanence comes responsibility, for land unguarded is land stolen, and buildings untended are monuments to decay. Thus, the Machiavellian builder ensures that each estate is defended, each hall is maintained, each stone is chosen with purpose. In this way, the dynasty does not merely buy property, but forges legacy. The ruler who ties his fortune to the earth will see his bloodline endure long after his enemies are forgotten. His name will live in deeds, inscriptions, and maps. Coins rust, paper burns, but land and stone endure. In them is written the language of power that cannot be silenced, the script of dynasties carved deep into time itself. No dynasty is built by one hand alone. Even the most cunning prince requires allies, patrons, and accomplices who expand his reach while shielding him from exposure. Machiavelli knew that open alliances often bring ruin, for those who march beside you today may one day march against you, but silent partners are different. They are the unseen threads that weave fortune together, the investors who provide capital, the families who bind themselves through marriage, the rivals turned into reluctant collaborators, because their survival depends on your success. Wealth that endures is not grown in isolation, but in networks carefully designed to favor one house above all others. A wise ruler learns to identify which partnerships to display for power's appearance and which to conceal for power's preservation. The greatest fortunes of history were rarely amassed by solitary brilliance, but by webs of allegiance where each partner believed they were gaining while, in truth, they were being absorbed into a greater design. The art lies in balancing their hunger against your advantage, feeding them just enough to keep them loyal, yet never enough to make them independent. Silent partners must believe they are necessary while, in reality, they are replaceable. In every age, marriages between families have been the most dangerous and most profitable of alliances, for blood ties strengthen loyalty even when fortunes shift. Yet one must never forget that blood carries ambition, and ambition unchecked can turn kin into enemies. To counter this, wealth must be distributed in ways that bind loyalty tighter than resentment, ensuring that each silent partner gains more from your dynasty's survival than from its fall. Consider also the merchant who funds your ventures, the banker who shields your assets, the official who looks away from your schemes. All of them are partners in silence, and all of them must be kept hungry enough to serve, yet satisfied enough not to betray. Their reward is not merely money, but access, favor, and proximity to your power. If ever they begin to imagine themselves your equals, you have erred. The strength of silent partners lies in their invisibility, for the world may attack what it sees, but it cannot strike what it does not know exists. Thus, the greatest fortunes are not traced through public records or titles, but through carefully hidden trusts, offshore havens of the past and present, and agreements sealed in words never written down. To master the art of generational wealth, one must treat alliances as both scaffolding and shackles tools that elevate your dynasty while binding others to its permanence. The lone man may rise quickly, but he will fall quicker still. The prince who surrounds himself with silent partners, however, builds a dynasty that survives storms, wars, and betrayals. For when enemies come, they will not only face you, but the hidden network that prospers only as long as you remain unbroken. That is the secret strength of partners unseen. Power often imagines itself protected by steel, But the sword is a blunt instrument that wins battles while losing empires. A man killed leaves behind a martyr, a cause, or a blood feud that festers for generations. Gold, however, erases without trace. A single payment can silence a tongue more effectively than a dozen blades, and a well-placed bribe can dismantle opposition more swiftly than an army. Machiavelli would remind us that force inspires resistance, while wealth applied with precision breeds obedience disguised as loyalty. Generational wealth is not secured by slaughter, but by the purchase of silence, the quiet buying of enemies, and the careful distribution of rewards that make betrayal more profitable than defiance. The ruler who understands this knows that every man has a price, whether it is coin, favor, or protection. To identify that price is to hold dominion over his will. Gold makes allies out of rivals, turns witnesses into shadows, and transforms potential rebels into beneficiaries who would rather see you prosper than see you fall. The sword may frighten, but gold corrupts, and corruption is a far deeper chain than fear, for men eventually grow bold against terror, but rarely bite the hand that feeds them. The families that endure through centuries do so not because they fought every battle, but because they purchased peace where war would have been ruinous. They paid off officials who might have exposed them. They rewarded enemies who could have united against them. And they scattered coins like seeds into the fields of resentment until those fields grew barren of resistance. Yet one must practice this art with calculation, for reckless generosity breeds parasites and endless requests. The secret lies in selective spending, rewarding those whose silence or loyalty costs the least yet yields the greatest security. A prince must learn to give enough to bind, but never so much that partners forget their dependency. The sword will always be necessary, but it should be the last resort, not the first. A sword cuts loudly, leaving scars and records, but gold dissolves conflict like water over stone, reshaping the landscape without a trace of struggle. This is the art of buying time, influence, and survival, and it is more effective than conquest. To preserve a dynasty, one must make the treasury into a weapon sharper than steel, for wealth applied with intelligence does not merely silence, it ensures the silence endures. The man who rules with fear will be remembered in whispers, but the man who rules with coin will not be spoken of at all, for there will be nothing left to say. Gold, discreetly given, buries the story before it is told, and that is how dynasties remain untouchable. Wealth that is seen is wealth that is threatened. The man who parades his fortune invites envy, taxation, robbery, and the slow poisoning of rivals who will not rest until his empire is reduced. Machiavelli would teach that the most dangerous mistake is to reveal the full extent of one's strength, for exposure is the invitation to attack. The law of secrecy demands that a dynasty cloak its true power behind layers of illusion, revealing just enough to inspire respect, but never enough to inspire rebellion. To the world, you must appear modest, even vulnerable, while in hidden ledgers and concealed estates, your fortune multiplies beyond reckoning. It is not deceit, but survival, for the powerful who remain visible become targets of kings, parliaments, and mobs alike. The invisible rich, however, rule without contest, for no one seeks to destroy what they cannot see. Generational wealth survives, not only because it is accumulated, but because it is concealed, passed through trusts, hidden within institutions, and disguised as weakness until it emerges unassailable. Even within families, secrecy is vital, For heirs who know too much too soon squander their fortune before it hardens into permanence. To reveal the treasure map is to guarantee betrayal from within, for ambition and greed are most dangerous when they wear the face of kin. The wise builder divides knowledge, granting each successor only the portion necessary to preserve, while the greater machinery remains shrouded, known only to a chosen few. Secrecy also extends beyond gold itself to strategy, for once your enemies know the design of your empire, they will spend their lives undoing it. A plan spoken aloud is already weakened. A plan written in silence is invincible. The law of secrecy turns wealth into shadow, moving unseen, striking unseen, accumulating unseen, so that when rivals awaken to your presence, it is already too late to resist. The most enduring dynasties of history were not those that flaunted their treasures, but those that disappeared into myth, their riches scattered across land, estates, and institutions so deeply embedded that no conqueror could uproot them. Consider that silence is the strongest vault, and secrecy the most unbreakable lock. Those who boast of their wealth die by their boasting, but those who conceal it extend their rule across generations. For what cannot be measured cannot be stolen, and what cannot be seen cannot be destroyed. The law of secrecy is the cloak that renders dynasties immortal, and without it every fortune, no matter how vast, will one day bleed itself out beneath the gaze of those who envy it. To endure you must not shine. You must vanish into the shadows and let time itself serve as your shield. The greatest threat to generational wealth does not come from outsiders, but from within the bloodline itself. Kingdoms have been shattered not by enemy armies, but by brothers who envied one another, by heirs who squandered fortunes, and by children raised in luxury but never trained in restraint. Machiavelli would warn that inheritance is both a blessing and a danger, for while it extends the reach of fortune, it also exposes it to the weakness of kin. A fortune passed without discipline is like a sword given to a child. It becomes a weapon of ruin rather than of power. Thus, the wise ruler prepares his heirs as carefully as he prepares his ledgers, ensuring that they inherit not only gold, but the character to guard it. Blood alone does not guarantee loyalty, for ambition runs hot in families, and the hands most likely to betray you are those that share your name. To preserve wealth across generations, succession must be crafted like a strategy of war. Each heir must be bound by duty, trained in secrecy, and given enough to secure loyalty, but never so much that they forget dependence. The law of inheritance is not generosity, it is governance. The family must be ordered like a kingdom, with hierarchy, rules, and punishments for disobedience, or else it dissolves into factions the moment the patriarch or matriarch is gone. Dynasties that endure do not leave division to chance. They write wills that cut off rebellion. They form trusts that bind the hands of careless heirs, and they design structures that outlive the personalities of those who inherit them. A child untrained in discipline will squander fortune in one lifetime, but a child raised with vigilance will multiply it into 10. Yet discipline is not only about denying pleasure, it is about instilling vision, teaching heirs to think not as consumers, but as rulers. They must see wealth as a throne to be guarded, not a feast to be devoured. The bloodline must be schooled in restraint, secrecy, and strategy, for only then will they understand that they are stewards of an empire greater than themselves. Machiavelli would argue that inheritance is not a right but a responsibility, and those unfit to bear it should be cut from the chain, no matter how close their blood. Better to wound the family than to destroy the dynasty. To preserve wealth through blood requires both cruelty and foresight. for sentimentality has destroyed more fortunes than war ever has. When blood is weak, wealth must be defended through structure. When blood is strong, wealth will flourish like a kingdom unshaken. The true legacy of a dynasty is not gold alone, but the training of heirs to protect it, for without that vigilance, every empire, no matter how vast, becomes a feast for vultures. The wisest rulers in history were often those who appeared poorest. Machiavelli understood that power thrives when hidden, for envy and scrutiny follow only those who display their fortune openly. The mask of poverty is one of the most effective shields for dynastic wealth, because it convinces rivals and rulers alike that you are harmless, unthreatening, and unworthy of attack. To appear modest is to be left alone, while to flaunt riches is to invite the tax collector, the schemer, and the thief. Generational wealth survives not by spectacle but by concealment, and the performance of humility is often the best disguise. Families that endured through centuries learned to dress simply while their estates stretched across nations, to speak modestly while their coffers overflowed, and to hide their strength behind the illusion of fragility. When a dynasty appears poor, it is spared the full force of envy, for people seldom strike at what seems beneath their notice. Yet beneath that mask lies a treasury multiplying in silence, fortified by discipline and secrecy, untouchable because no one suspects its existence. The mask of poverty also serves as a weapon, for when others believe you weak, they reveal themselves, exposing their greed, their arrogance, and their carelessness. A man who believes you have nothing will lower his guard, and in that moment your hidden wealth can buy his loyalty or dismantle his position. In politics and finance alike, the one who pretends poverty often holds the richest hand. But to wear this mask well requires restraint and art, for the illusion must be convincing. The dynasty must learn to sacrifice display for survival, to allow others the pride of flaunting while they enjoy the security of permanence. Modesty becomes not a virtue but a strategy, one that deceives the world while preserving the dynasty's core. Machiavelli would insist that power is safest when it does not draw attention, for the strongest rulers are those who are underestimated until it is too late. To wear the mask of poverty is not to live without wealth, but to master it, to bend it into silence so that it serves without exposing you to danger. When wealth is hidden, it can never be stolen. When power is invisible, it cannot be attacked. The mask ensures survival across generations, for even when kingdoms fall and governments crumble, the family that appears poor slips through unnoticed, their fortune untouched. In a world where every empire attracts enemies, the greatest protection is to become invisible to envy. Thus, the dynasty that hides its gold beneath the mask of poverty builds a fortress stronger than stone, for it shields not only wealth, but legacy. The mask is not weakness, but strategy, and those who master it endure long after the proud have been destroyed. Gold is more than currency. It is power distilled, a force that conquers without armies and subdues without blood. Machiavelli would say that a wise ruler knows his treasury is not simply to be preserved, but to be wielded like a blade. To use money only for survival is weakness. To use it as a weapon is mastery. The treasury can destroy enemies, not by violence, but by debt. For when a man owes you, he becomes your servant, and when a state owes you, it becomes your vassal. The strongest dynasties understood that lending was a form of conquest, one far safer and more enduring than war. To place others in your debt is to rule them quietly, for gratitude fades, but obligation endures until paid, and most debts are never truly settled. The treasury can also be a weapon of corruption, buying loyalty where fear would fail, bending laws where resistance would otherwise stand, and turning rivals into instruments of your will without their knowledge. With gold, you may fund both sides of a conflict, ensuring that no matter who triumphs, your fortune expands. With gold, you may starve an enemy by cornering resources or rescue an ally at the price of permanent obedience. Armies may betray, swords may break, but a well-placed coin never misses its mark. Yet to wield the treasury with precision demands cold calculation, for reckless spending dulls the blade. Money must never be wasted on vanity or dispersed without purpose. Every payment must be an investment in dominance. The ruler who funds for appearances buys only fleeting applause, while the one who funds for control buys silence, loyalty, and dependence. Generational wealth thrives not because it is saved, but because it is deployed, each coin marching like a soldier toward victory. The great families of history did not merely hoard. They manipulated markets, cornered supplies, and financed kings, knowing that control of the purse is control of the throne. When armies starved, they supplied grain. When kingdoms bled, they offered loans. And when those debts chained rulers to them, they extended their dynasty's reach beyond the horizon. The treasury must be sharpened as carefully as a sword, for if it is seen as endless, it will be drained. If it is used without foresight, it will be blunted. But in silence and strategy, it becomes the most dangerous weapon of all. Generational wealth is secured when gold does not rest in vaults, but moves across the board as a hidden army, striking with precision, buying power, buying silence, buying immortality. A prince who learns to wield his treasury as a weapon will never need the sword, for the world will already be conquered by his invisible hand. Wealth demands more than the accumulation of coin. It demands the creation of memory, a ledger that carries both numbers and names beyond the span of one lifetime. Machiavelli would say that power which is not recorded might as well never have existed, for time erases those who leave no trace. The eternal ledger is not merely an account of assets, but a design for continuity, a record of what has been built, how it has been guarded, and how it must be preserved. Dynasties that endure do not leave their heirs with gold alone, but with instructions, trusts, and structures that ensure the flow of wealth cannot be easily disrupted. Without such order, the next generation falls to ignorance, scattering treasures through carelessness and infighting. A ledger is more than numbers. It is law. It defines ownership, dictates inheritance, and binds the living to the vision of the dead. Those who fail to preserve records place their fortunes at the mercy of courts, thieves, and forgetfulness. Those who master the ledger build an invisible fortress, one that endures even when kings fall and governments dissolve. The eternal ledger must be designed not only to account, but to conceal, for transparency invites intrusion. Within its pages lies the power to guide generations yet unborn, teaching them discipline and secrecy, reminding them that they are stewards of a throne rather than owners of a feast. Families that survived centuries built institutions, foundations, trusts, councils that served as living ledgers, ensuring that their wealth remained intact and that no single heir could destroy what had been designed to last. They understood that mortality is the enemy of fortune, but the ledger is immortality in ink and stone. Each generation becomes but a chapter in a longer story, and the true measure of wealth is not how brightly one life shone, but how enduringly the dynasty continued. To keep such a record is not sentiment but strategy, for the ledger guards against decay by reminding heirs of the cost of carelessness and the duty of preservation. A coin forgotten is a coin stolen, but a coin recorded is a coin defended. The eternal ledger ensures that no fortune dies in silence, that no treasure drifts into the hands of outsiders, and that no bloodline forgets the design that brought it power. Generational wealth is not built for one man but for many, not for one life but for countless. And without the ledger, even the greatest empire dissolves into dust. To endure, one must write, one must record, one must preserve. For when the man is gone, the ledger remains, and through it, his power speaks forever. The true test of wealth is not how it serves you in life, but how it speaks for you in death. A man who builds only for himself dies twice, once in body and once in memory. But the one who builds for generations wears a crown that endures beyond the grave. Machiavelli would argue that fortune without legacy is nothing but smoke, vanishing at the first breath of time. The crown beyond death is the inheritance of vision, the creation of a structure so strong that even when its architect is gone, it continues to govern the living. Wealth, when designed well, becomes a voice that whispers long after silence has claimed the body, guiding heirs, bending rivals, and shaping history itself. To build such a crown demands foresight greater than ambition. It demands that a man think not of what he desires, but of what his bloodline requires. The fleeting pleasure of consumption must be cast aside for the permanence of construction, for every wasted coin is a chisel striking at your own tombstone. The families remembered across centuries are those who understood this truth. Their founders did not live as kings of their own time, but as architects of futures they would never see. They accepted that death is inevitable, but they refused to allow it to sever their grip on power. Through trusts, estates, and unbreakable rules of inheritance, they reached beyond their graves and held the hands of their descendants, forcing discipline where sentiment would have failed. The crown beyond death is also symbolic, for it represents not only the survival of wealth, but the immortality of influence. A man who builds well becomes more than flesh. He becomes an institution. His name becomes a currency, his bloodline a kingdom, his vision a law that no rival can easily undo. Death, in this way, is not an end but a passage into permanence. The weak fear the grave, because they know it erases them. The strong embrace it, because they know their designs will outlive them. Generational wealth is the only true defiance of mortality, for while the body returns to dust, the dynasty continues, walking through centuries carrying the mark of its founder. This is the final law, to build not for yourself, but for eternity. Every act of restraint, every act of secrecy, every alliance, and every fortress of discipline has led to this crown, invisible yet enduring, worn not on your head, but on the heads of those who carry your name after you. The crown beyond death is the only one that cannot be stolen, for it is not worn in life but carved into legacy. To die with wealth that dies with you is to die as a beggar, but to die with a dynasty that thrives without you is to rule forever. If you have followed these 13 chapters, you now understand what few ever will. Wealth is not numbers in an account. It is design, discipline, and domination across time. It is the throne that endures when every empire falls. Most men will die with nothing but scraps, but you do not have to. You can choose to build a dynasty that carries your name into eternity. If this spoke to you, remember this is only the beginning. Subscribe, turn on the bell, and step deeper into the dark truths of power, finance, and Machiavelli's laws.